Hello, everyone. How are you guys? So the conference is slowing down. You seem relaxed from here. It's good to see you again. It's good to see old friends. So thank you, Paul, for the nice introduction. For those of you who don't know me, I work independently as a consultant. I work with organizations who want to change for some reason. So they call me in because they want some kind of change. Which is a very mysterious word sometimes. Could be very large organizations sometimes, such as the United Nations, or very, very small companies. But they want this thing which is called change. So with change comes expectations. And this is what I'd like to talk about today. So apparently, according to William Shakespeare, this idea that expectation fails is not new to technology. Okay. He's saying that very often expectation fails, and most often where most they promise. So, what do we mean by expectation? So let's try to define expectations, at least in this context, of course. I'm not trying to come up with a universal definition of an expectation. But to do this, I would need Pavel. Where's Pavel? Back there. Pavel, I need you. You can stay there. I have a question for you. Let's say you go to the bar and you ask for a beer. Something you never do, right? Never do that, yes. And they get you a very good beer, perfect temperature in the right glass. Would you be happy? You would. So I want a beer, I get a beer, I'm happy. Good. But let's say that you ask for a beer and you get a cappuccino. Would you be happy? No, that's what I thought. Thank you, Pavel. So sometimes it's very easy to understand what an expectation is. I want something, I get something, I'm happy or I'm not happy. Okay? Sometimes, although, it's trickier. Like in this case, our product is supposed to be delivered by the end of May because our market window ends. After that date, the product will not be as valuable as it could be. Okay? So we deliver by May 29th, and we're happy. Client is happy, stakeholders are happy, users are happy, the team is happy. Or we want that product is delivered by May 29th, except that one key feature is missing. Happy? Nope. Probably not. Probably not. So what happened there? Was it a communication problem? Something that we forgot to talk about? Was some kind of assumption that was not clear enough? So what happened? So sometimes these expectations that fail are not so simple as I want a beer, I get a beer, I'm happy. So where is the complexity? I'm trying to come up with a kind of a simple model for expectation. The idea is very simple. You make a decision, like I want a beer. There is an outcome. There is some kind of feedback. Okay, I wanted a beer, I've got a beer, I'm happy. Or maybe not. And then you probably take another decision based on that feedback. Like, oh, that was good, let's get another one. Okay? And then, oh, that was very good, let's get another one. Up to the point where it becomes hard to articulate the sentence, I want beer, and the loop ends. Okay? So that was an example. But the question is, the outcome you cannot control. The feedback is objective. The question is, how about the decision that you're making? How about the decision? Which are the rules by which you make decisions? Because the decisions you take will determine the outcome and will determine if your expectation failed or is met. And in a project, in a software project, we take hundreds, thousands of decisions throughout the lifetime of a project. So understanding what happens when it comes to making decisions, it's interesting to me. Turns out that what we've been talking about was just what we could call the tip of the iceberg. And let me give you some theory first, and then we do something more practical. So if we talk about organizational culture, Mr. Edgar Schein is suggesting that on the surface, what we see are artifacts. And an artifact could be the language we use in the team, or the decisions, of course, that we make. Could be the physical layout, could be the processes. Basically, everything that we can feel or observe. So those are artifacts. But if you look below the surface of an organizational culture, you will find values and beliefs. Something like ideologies or goals, aspirations, something we believe in. But if you look even deeper, and that's the most interesting part, you will find basic assumptions, which are something we take for granted. And of course, there are many of those, but many of these basic assumptions, as you can read, are unconscious. You can tell there's something strange in the complexity of an organization. What I mean is, you can see that organizations are complex animals, because if you look at the artifacts, you will notice that some things are kind of out of joint. Like, for example, you would hear statements like top management or executives saying, we value teamwork here. At the same time, you observe the reward system in the organization, and it's clearly designed to promote competition among individuals. So how can you meet this expectation of having good teamwork if you promote individual competition? For example, this is an expectation that is doomed to fail. Or we want to do Agile, and then you talk with line managers or project managers, and turns out that projects are expected to be with fixed time and scope. But we want to do Agile. Interesting, right? Or you talk with the teams, technical teams, and they tell you, oh yeah, we would like to have some time to have a sustainable pace, like Toby was saying, but we don't have time for that. I'm sorry, we don't have time to self-improve. At the same time, that team keeps taking on more and more work, even though they could refuse. So you see these kind of dissonances in the artifacts. Now, another gentleman, Mr. Peter Senge, introduced the concept of mental models. Basically, the decision rules I was talking about, remember the surface there, the outcome, decision, feedback, that part is just the part in which I want a beer, I get a beer, I'm happy. But what we're talking about is, which are the rules by which we make decisions? We decide that we get another beer, for example. So there are rules behind that, and those rules most frequently are driven by mental models. So what's a mental model? It's something that we need as humans to make sense of the world, and it's absolutely subjective. It's basically a set of stories, or impressions, assumptions that you have about the world. And using these, you filter the complexity of the world, and you try to simplify it and to live with it. So mental models. Mental models are, most of the time, completely unconscious, but they could be brought to the surface. Another gentleman, Chris Argyris, suggested that there is a way to learn about how we think, which he called double loop learning. And Marcin has been talking wonderfully about learning yesterday. So in double loop learning, we just don't learn that if we order a beer and we get a beer, we are happy, so we can have another one. But we also learn, we get some feedback about, okay, what is the mental model that I'm using that is active inside of me so that I do want another beer? So this kind of understanding in an individual, in a team, or in an organization, bringing to the surface mental models will most likely increase the probability that the results meet the expectation. Because at this point, you are aware of what you want to expect, which is different from expecting something. So if we put all together, and we also add a little spice, which is called a shared vision, okay? You see that the complexity of having expectations and creating an ecosystems in which the probability of meeting expectation raises, it's not so simple. There is much more than meets the eye. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not just a surface. Again, generally, our concept of expectation is, I want this, I got it. And that's where expectation ends. But there is much, much, much more. So what I would like to talk about is the decision rules, the mental models, the feedback, the double loop learning. Basically, the idea is, how can you replace a mental model in an organization or team or whatever, it's a social system, in such a way that benefits that system, and possibly in a way that the system, the organization, decides to do. So how do you change the peg? It's a metaphor. I'd like to try an experiment with you guys, and surprisingly, it does not involve standing up. It requires talking, okay? It requires talking. But of course, you are totally free to accept or respectfully decline my proposal. So if you don't like to talk with the people around you, that's perfectly fine. But anyway, some people will talk and will be making some noise. So at some point, I will need to bring the group together again because we have a limited amount of time. So do you know the thing about someone raising his hand or her hand, and you do the same, and at the same time, you finish your sentence, and then you stop? You know what? Okay, let's try this. So when you see me doing this, you stop talking, and you raise your hand. Okay? Make some noise. Noise, 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 noise. Now. Blah, 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 blah. More, blah. Thank you very much. That's what we're going to do to regroup, because we don't have much time. So what I'd like to talk about, what I'd like you guys to talk about, the guys at the table there, maybe you can just share this with the other people around you, the people here in the front, do whatever you want, find someone to talk to if you like to, okay? So remember, I mentioned these dissonant artifacts, like we don't have time to improve, but we're taking on more work, okay? Now, is any of you familiar with this? Ever happened to you? Raise your hand. A team that's saying, I'm sorry, we don't have time, but they keep taking on more work? Okay, this is not that team, okay? We're not talking about you, we're talking about some fictional team. But what I'd like you to do is to spend 3 minutes, and I will be timing this, okay, to try to make hypotheses about what could be going on there. Why would a team say that they don't have time to improve, and in fact they don't, at the same time they take on more work, okay? So I will give you 3 minutes to think about this and share your ideas with the group at your table or whatever, and then I will regroup, okay? Go, have fun. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. So, what did you find? Can I have someone would like to share? In your group, what was the hypothesis? I need one. I'm sorry? Pressure, okay. Where does the pressure come from? Milestone, okay, so deadline-driven development. Okay, that's one possibility. Any other? Somebody? Yes? Okay, it's an excuse for not doing something. Yep, okay, thank you. Oh, Liz. I'm sorry, I cannot hear you from...
So Olaf and I actually have quite a bit of time because we're both independent. But we realised that we want more work, and when it's difficult to find work, it makes us demotivated, and we don't have the energy to improve the ways in which we go out and get work, which is an interesting... There you go.
Okay, thank you. So, so as you can see, we have very different opinions, and the reason is that when you look at artifacts, they are easy to spot, but they are very hard to make sense of, because there is so much below the surface. Could be an excuse, could be management, deadline-driven development, blah, 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 blah. Could be many things. Now, I'm going to ask you for the next step. And the next step is, I'm going to give you less than 2 minutes, probably, and I would like to do something, a little twist. The question is, which you think was your own mental model which made you think that it could be an excuse, or it could be deadline-driven? And I'm sure there are many different opinions here. So the question is, basically, I'm turning the question not to an hypothetical team, I'm turning the question to you as an individual, okay? And the question is, what do you think is your own mental model, so that you thought that these guys are using that as an excuse, or the environment is not supporting them, and so on and so on and so on. I will give you 1 minute to think about this, okay? Just 1 minute. You can do this in silence. You don't need to talk if you don't want to. But think about that. What was your own mental model for you as a person? Any flash of light? Somebody wants to share? You don't have to. You can. Okay, that's fine. I think time is running out, so I need to move on. This was an example of what we call reflection. And Olaf has been talking about reflection quite a lot yesterday. Okay? It's about self-reflection. The idea is that you review not only the artifacts, which means statements and behavior, but you also start asking questions about, why am I interpreting reality in such a way? So that's called self-reflection. And it can be done by an individual, or it can be done in a team. How do you do that in a team? By talking, but also visualizing things or having specific data. Now, the thing is, if you want to do, I don't know if you noticed the change that there was in you. When I asked you, could you please think about someone else, someone who has a problem, and let's try to analyze their problem. And then I asked you, okay, what made you think what you thought? Did you notice the difference? Did you notice how much defensive you became? How much reluctant you are about sharing your mental model? How much vulnerable you feel when it comes to talking about, this is the way I perceive reality. Okay? Now, if you do this in a team, you can expect resistance and projection. Projection is when you have this kind of parallel conversations. So somebody is talking about, okay, well, so why do you keep taking on more and more work? And projection is, oh, it's not us. It's the managers that keep us giving more work. Okay? Why are you not self-improving? Oh, because the organization doesn't have time. No? Projection is when you try to deflect the question outside of you. And it's a defense mechanism. Gitte and Lillian have been talking quite a lot about how change can be scary. But if you can create this kind of environment, and if you can use factual data, that becomes much easier. So what I'm trying to say is, the little experiment that we did here in 5 minutes, it's based on the same principles. Try to analyze something, come up with objective data, or visualize something, and then ask people to give their own interpretation, not about what they are looking at, but about why they interpret that in their way. And share that. That creates much more alignment. So the first thing I've been telling you is, yes, you can bring to the surface mental models, which in an organization is an extremely important thing to do because it creates more alignment. And if people are aligned, the level of unmet expectations will probably decrease. The other thing you can do is not just to try to bring that to the surface using data, you can also try to provide alternatives. You can tell stories from the world, like these two. Like, let's say that one mental model is that financial payoffs are predictable or should be predictable, like budgets. Okay, we want to spend this and we want to get that in return. Okay, this kind of thing. Or things will not change. Okay, we will make a plan and things will be what we expect to. Okay, well, I have a couple of examples that sometimes I use. Let's take, for example, the music industry. The music industry has dramatically changed their business model because up to 10 years ago, we used to go to music stores and buy physical records, which means that those things needed to be recorded in professional studios. We needed to print the vinyl, to print the album, ship this thing using trucks and so on and so on. And these are all costs, including the professional recording. But now, that this music that we used to buy has been, as we say, ephemeralized, is intangible now. We don't need a physical medium to ship the music. We can just download it. So not only we can buy music, but there is an entire online music store. Previously, I used to go to the store to buy music. Now it's the store that's coming to me whenever I want, wherever I am. It's here. I have a store here. I can pay with virtual money to buy a virtual good. Okay? There's a virtual sales assistant. There's a virtual catalog that I can browse. The entire store is here because it's no longer physical. And that has dramatically changed the ratio between costs and profits, right? It's much cheaper to produce music now, much, much cheaper to produce music and to distribute music. The business model has changed. And since it is an Agile and Lean conference, if you know about Lean and this Lean product development approach, probably you know that there's a statement by Einstein, and he's saying that if we make much more money from success than we make from failure, okay, then we can risk more, basically. We don't need to have this 50% certainty that we will get some kind of financial return, which is exactly what the music industry, in general the publishing industry, movies, TV, books, is doing. What they're doing is saying, okay, it costs so little now to produce something and distribute it that I may risk to produce 100 records in 1 year, expecting returns on just 5 of them. If I have a full success on only 5 of these records, I can risk to be a failure for 95%, because the costs are very low and the profits are still high. Okay? It's a different business model. But this is an example, not of a business model, it's an example of a mental model. And you can bring this, you can talk about this with your management, for example. You can say, well, these guys, the publishing industry, they've changed their way to do business. Hey, dude, we are a software company. Who is more intangible than us? Who is selling more intangible product than ourselves? So why should we learn from them? Why shouldn't we change our mental model and business model? So what I'm saying is, you can give evidence to the mental models and discuss them, using inquiry and so on and so on and so on. You can visualize, or you can provide alternatives. You can take stories from the world and say, some people are doing something different. Like in this case, uncertainty. In Geneva, the CERN, they're doing antimatter experiments. In 2012, they needed to slow down their schedule because in Thailand, rained a lot, because Thailand was flooded. And the reason is that Thailand is the largest producer of hard disks on the planet. And the guys at CERN in Geneva, they ran out of memory space. They didn't know where to store those petabytes that they get with every single experiment. So if the world, if the society we live in is so interconnected, maybe this idea of things will not change, things are predictable, maybe we can revise that. Or, do you know these guys? The bane of mobile operators. Okay? These are the founders of WhatsApp. A few years ago, mobile operators invested billions in expanding their infrastructure because they were planning to make money from text messaging. And then these guys show up. Okay? And boom. Who is text messaging? Who's using WhatsApp in this room? How many of you are using WhatsApp? Okay? About 20%. But 20% less text messaging revenues for a mobile operator, well, it's a big loss. So it's very unpredictable. So what's the mental model behind that? This idea that you can predict things, you can stick to the plan. Well, maybe there are alternatives, like these guys. Goiko, Chris Metz, and Olaf. I especially like Olaf's picture here. They are providing alternatives to this idea that things can be predicted. You can use impact mapping if you want to run a set of fail-safe experiments. Or you could use real options. I'm not going to explain what these are. What I'm saying in this context is you can bring these as examples to people as different mental models. It's not just a business model, it's the mindset that is different. So, I think we're done. And what I've been trying to convey in these 30 minutes is that expectations are inherent in life, as Shakespeare pointed out, are inherent in what we do, especially because in a software project or in an organization, we take hundreds, thousands of decisions, in some places every day. So if there is a decision, there must be an outcome. When the outcome doesn't match the expectation that was behind this decision, we are not happy. But the question is, and that's the thing, that's the below the surface. How do we make decisions? Especially in a social, complex system like an organization. Are these decisions aligned to the same mental models? Are these decisions, for example, reasonable or realistic? Kasia was talking this morning about saying no, learn to say no. If an expectation is totally unrealistic, say no and provide alternatives. As she was saying. Yep. So what you can do is you can develop your sensibility, your sensitivity to artifacts. Start to observe when artifacts do not match, okay? And start asking questions. Then again, using objective data, using self-reflection, inquiry. And the other good thing is make sure that everybody knows which are the rules by which we make decisions. We could say, for example, we strongly believe we have surfaced that in our team we are really scared about job security. And that's the reason why we keep taking on more and more work and we don't improve. But we have been able to surface that, for example. So at that point your decisions become more sensible. And probably your expectations will be met. I hope so. That's my wish to you. So I'm done. Thank you very much for your attention. That's me, my contact information. I'd like to get it to stay in touch. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on SlideShare if you like the slides. These slides will be uploaded tomorrow night as I get home. Okay? So thank you very much.